I'm Jason Lewis with LPT Realty here in Casper, Wyoming. And I'm here at the job site of Gateway Construction's Gallatin model. This home is currently at frame stage. I want to show you some things that are critical things that you need to know at this stage of construction. During the frame stage, we often get asked, what type of construction do the walls consist of? The exterior walls of a home, if you want to come on inside, I'm going to show you those. The exterior walls of new construction homes built in Casper, Wyoming consist of a 2x6 exterior wall. And the reason for a 2x6 exterior wall is we are able to get a minimum of an R19 insulation on an exterior wall, clear up to an excess of an R30 if you did blown-in cellulose or spray foam insulation on an exterior wall. And they're also set at 16-inch centers. On the interior walls of a home, they are 2x4 interior walls set on 16-inch centers. Okay, when it comes to the 2x6 exterior wall, due to Casper's strict energy codes, this allows us for a multitude of exterior insulation options. One option is a batt paper-faced insulation that gives us an R value of an R19. It also gives us the ability to do, let's say, a blown-in insulation that gives us an R value of an R23. The other option for insulation is a blown-in foam insulation. The biggest difference is when it comes to insulation is the R value actually means something. It's the number of hours that it takes from an exterior temperature to penetrate the insulation and reach its way to the inside of the wall. So if it's an R19 insulation, that's 19 hours. If it's R23, that's 23 hours for that temperature to penetrate the home. So you have some decisions to make when you're at this stage of construction as to what R value is best suited for you in your new home. The next big thing to consider and to pay attention to during the frame stage of construction is the installation of windows. Let me come show you this window, how it is installed in this particular home. It's really important that when you have your windows installed in your home, that there is a 1/4-inch gap all the way around the window. This gap is super important as this home gets finished and the temperature changes. This window will expand and retract. If there is not a 1/4-inch gap of free-floating space around this window, it can cause significant issues while you're living in your home. Because what happens is, as the temperature increases and decreases, this window expands and retracts. There can cause pressure in the framing if you don't have that 1/4-inch gap. And what will happen is, on a sliding window like this is, or a casement window that cranks open, you may not be able to open and close your window if the framing causes the window to be in a bind because there's not that free-floating space around it. So it's critical that when a window is installed at framing stage, that there is a 1/4-inch gap, especially on vinyl windows, all the way around the window. We are now in the master bath of this Gateway Construction home, and I want to show you a feature that has become very, very popular that is super important at frame stage. What we have here is the master bath shower floor. And if you notice, the master bath shower floor is lowered in this space and enables us to do a 0-entry master bath shower. Whereas most showers, they have a built-up curb that would go on the outside of this. Whereas this is recessed down, and it has to be recessed into the floor joists to where they're lowered. That will enable the tile installer to build the shower pan floor up to be flush with the tile floor upon construction and completion of the shower. This will allow for a 0 threshold entry where there would be no lip that would traditionally be around the top, and it's a nice clean look. And it also is a benefit for people that might have mobility issues or future trip hazards, or mobility issues and trip hazards, where you don't have that curb. You can walk right in without having to step over a lip. Super awesome feature, but this is definitely one thing that has to be decided at this stage of construction in order to get a zero threshold entry shower. And one thing in this home that I want to show you is the floor system in this home of how it was built. You have a couple different options when it comes to floor systems. One of which, like this home has, it actually has floor trusses. So I want to show you what a floor truss is. So in here, this particular home has floor trusses. And as you can see in the construction here, it's exactly that. It is an actual truss that is able to reach longer lengths of span without having support posts. Also, floor trusses can also carry a greater weight. So if you have a concern that you have a long span and that your floor might be kind of spongy, you can definitely consider floor trusses versus the standard I-joists that come in most homes. And we're now down in the basement of this home, and you can actually really see the difference with these floor trusses versus a standard I-joist.
So, as Jason brought up in an earlier video, is your floor system, the span of your joists or the floor trusses are engineered to spec. So if our I-joists here, they have to be a little bit closer together, so that could limit you in some options of basement finishes, how you want to do your heating system through the house, whether you're wanting, a complete propane system versus all electric. HVAC is one of the biggest issues that you run into with the difference between a floor joist and a floor truss. Typically, your floor joists are going to be anywhere from 14 to 18 inches tall, which leaves a little less room for you to run your square piping for your HVAC system, all of your plumbing, drainage, everything else like that. Whereas once you dive into the floor trusses themselves, typically those come at a 22 to 24 inch height, which gives your other subcontractors quite a bit of extra room to work with, makes some things easier for them. And overall, at the end, it could lead to less softening in the basement and a more flat look if that's something you prefer.
I wanted to point out something that I often get asked questions about is the way that this wall is framed. And this is a basement wall where this basement's finished, but notice that this wall is a floating wall. It's not framed all the way down to the concrete. And the reason for that is with a floating wall, if you ever get any kind of movement with the concrete slab, it doesn't push the wall up to the main floor and make the floor uneven up there. It allows the slab to maintain a free floating state. So that way, again, if this slab were to ever move, it doesn't affect this wall's aesthetics in this basement. So that's why it's like that. So I'm here with James, the superintendent for Gateway Homes of Wyoming in Casper, and one great thing about these guys is their quality control process is really superior to what you typically see in the market. James, what do you want to point out in terms of the framing process? What things are super important to look for that could affect the finishing of the home later on? Things that you might see in the construction process if they're not caught at this stage of construction that could impact, let's say the finishing of the sheetrock, how straight the baseboards are. What are some of those things that you guys do at this stage of construction to prevent some of those problems?
So Jason, one thing we'll go through and do at this stage of construction is I'll typically grab a 4-foot or a 6-foot level. I'll walk all the interior and exterior walls, and essentially what I'm looking for is just bowed studs or bowed out or bowed in studs. That can cause you real big problems future down the road when you're throwing sheetrock up. It can cause a wall to look completely unfinished. It might have cracks later on in the future. Another important aspect of this process is double checking all of your rough openings for doors, windows. Once the sheetrockers come in here and start going, it's essentially the same as licking that stamp and sending a letter off to Santa just to, it's not going to come back. You kind of need to make sure that everything is up to the plans, what the homeowners are looking for, design specs. Are we going to have a door that we're going to have to take apart and redo because it wasn't plumbed out straight? Are we going to have to take apart the drywall and fix the header height? There's so many different aspects that come into the framing. Straight lumber, locations, running plumbing up through the lumber. Everything has to be at a good point, because if it's not, you're going to run into issues after drywall, because once it's capped in, it's kind of a pain to get anything else fixed.
So I noticed on some of all of your guys' homes, you actually go through and you visually mark every single 2x4 or 2x6 stud inside the home. And I've noticed there's been like orange paint on certain 2x4s or 2x6s. What does the orange paint mean when you guys do that?
So I'll go through and I will discuss with our subcontractors first. Essentially, it's just a legend that I like to do. If I have a solid line, that means they go through with a planer and trim it down. If there's dots, it means that they need to go through and shim it out at the drywall process. If there's an actual X on the stud, I deem it as a stud that, you know, is too warped or bent to actually shim out and shave.
So what you're saying, it's a lot easier to really inspect the framing at frame stage before you proceed with the finishing of the home to ensure that the product is superior in the end with the fit and finish overall of the home.
All right, so one thing that we'll do is essentially, you know, a straight piece of wood, you come through, and right here I can already tell that this right here is going to be a problem when sheetrock gets applied. So I'll come through, check that stud, and typically, you know, you start at one part of the house, kind of like going through a maze. You always work your way left around. I'll continue to move through the house, essentially checking, make sure that we don't have any huge bows in any material. Anything that is a dotted type point.
And it's especially important in the kitchen with how the cabinets get installed. If that wall's not perfect, you'll definitely see it in the installation of the cabinets.
So, and obviously you have a wood bowed one direction, it's going to be concaved on the other side. So they can shave down the other side of this stud here, but during the sheetrock process, they have tiny little 1/16, 1/8 inch type shims that they will put up on this before they apply the sheetrock. That way it stays straight the whole time. And that is the difference between some of the quality control that we do with, you know, a legend, talking to the subcontractors, making sure that everybody's standards are being met.
I'm here with James again in another construction site, but I wanted to stop by this home to show you something super important in the kitchen of this home and in other areas in terms of backing, okay, or blocking. If you look in this kitchen, you will notice that we have horizontal 2x6s that are built into this wall. This is for when you install the cabinets. A lot of builders, they overlook this aspect of the framing process, and this makes installing the cabinets significantly easier for the cabinet installer. And then also in this pantry, when you go to build in the shelving, if you don't have this backing or blocking where your shelves go, the trim carpenter doesn't really have a whole lot to screw into. So therefore, this blocking or backing gives you a lot more structure and stability to the shelves that you put in here. Because I've seen it in homes where contractors have put shelves with no blocking in here, and people put crock pots and different heavy appliance items in their pantry, and then the pantry shelves just fall off of the wall. So to see this backing in here is a super important feature that you should definitely make sure happens in your home.
So one thing you might notice out here in this pantry region is a couple spray painted orange studs. So these orange studs right here, going through doing my initial quality control walk on the framing itself, I go through, double check it all, and when they are spray painted like this, it means they either need to be shaved down or adjusted with a slight cut and bowed in to make that stud even straighter.